Jai Hind everyone, a very warm welcome to Vedika Darpan. Today we're diving straight into decoding an ancient era of massive transformation in a fast-paced, fact-driven explainer. If you've ever found yourself wanting a clear, no-nonsense breakdown of how ancient Indian society was structured, how it evolved, and the dramatic shifts that literally changed history forever, you are in exactly the right place. Let's get into it.
We've got our hands on these incredibly detailed handwritten notes that map out the entire Vedic civilization, spanning all the way from 1500 to 600 BC. What's so cool here is how these source notes capture the raw data of history. We're going to transform them into crystal clear concepts today, uncovering the origins of the Aryans and the foundational texts they left behind.
So to really wrap our heads around this massive chunk of time, history divides the era into two distinct halves. First, we have the early Rigvedic period starting in 1500 BC. This leads right up to a massive historical pivot point at 1000 BC, which marks the shift into the later Vedic period, running until 600 BC. Definitely keep this 1000 BC dividing line in the back of your mind. It is the absolute key to understanding everything we're about to cover.
But okay, hold on a second. Before we jump into the timeline, we gotta ask, who exactly were the Aryans who founded this civilization? And where did they even come from? Well, scholars have debated this for years, and the theories are wildly diverse. Max Muller argued for Central Asia, while Swami Dayanand Saraswati pointed toward Tibet. Bal Gangadhar Tilak famously hypothesized they came all the way from the Arctic region. No way, right? Meanwhile, Avinash Chandra Des argued they were actually indigenous to the Sapta Sindhu region itself.
Now, regardless of where they originally came from, the ultimate source code for their entire way of life comes down to four core texts, the Vedas. Compiled by Maharishi Krishna Dwayapayana, each Veda served a highly specific purpose. You've got the Rig Veda, which is the oldest, then the Samaveda, which is deeply rooted in music and poetic style. The Yajurveda focuses heavily on sacrificial rituals, and finally, the Atharvaveda deals with spells and magic.
And just to give you a sense of scale here, 1028. That's the mind-blowing number of hymns, or suktas, packed into the massive Rigveda alone. The whole thing is divided up into 10 mandalas. And hey, quick fact check for you. It's actually in the third mandala of this massive text where we find the highly revered Gayatri mantra.
Geographically, this early civilization thrived in a spot called Sapta Sindhu, which literally translates to the land of seven rivers. Now, if you're taking an exam on this, memorizing the ancient river names alongside their modern equivalents is an absolute cheat code. It brilliantly shows how geography translates over millennia. For example, the ancient Sutudri, that's today's Sutlej. The Parshni is the Ravi. Vitasta is the Jhelum. Askini is the Chenab. And the Vipasa is the Bias.
All right, moving on to our first major section, early Vedic society structure.
You know, what's genuinely fascinating here is how this era completely shatters our modern assumptions about the ancient world. Early Vedic society was surprisingly progressive for women. They had the absolute right to education, which was symbolized by the Apanyan Sanskar. They actively participated in major political councils like the Sabha and Vidath. They held property rights, they practiced widow remarriage, and the era actually produced highly respected female scholars, figures like Lopamudra, Apala, and Gosha.
Structurally, it was like a giant puzzle that just made logical sense, scaling up step by step. At the very base was the family unit, the Kul, led by a Kulap. Multiple families formed a Gram, or a village, led by a Gramani. Those villages then formed a Vish, which became a Jan, scaling all the way up to the highest level, the Rashtra, or the state. The Rashtra was led by a Rajan, but here's the crucial takeaway. In this early period, the Rajan's power was not yet strictly hereditary or absolute.
Yeah, the Rajan couldn't just do whatever he wanted. His power was actually kept in check by a system of democratic councils. Governance was driven by four main bodies. You had the Vidath, which our sources note as the oldest. The Gana functioned for the army. Then you had the Sabha, which acted a lot like an upper house made up of educated elders. And the Simiti, acting as a sort of lower house for the general public.
To run this tribal state efficiently, the Rajan relied on specialized officials. Think of it as an ancient cabinet. The Rajan Purohit acted essentially as a prime minister and chief priest. The Senani was the army chief, and remarkably, they had a highly organized intelligence and security apparatus. The Spash functioned as spies, and they even had a dedicated police force known as the Ugra or Jaiva.
Okay, let's switch gears a bit to our next section, economy and ancient gods.
So we know how they governed, but how did they actually survive day to day?
Well, their economy was strictly rural. The absolute primary occupation was animal husbandry. Cattle were quite literally the measure of wealth. Agriculture was strictly secondary at this point. And because they were semi-nomadic pastoralists, there was no real concept of individual land ownership. However, they did engage in trade and utilized a form of gold currency known as the nishka.
Spiritually, their beliefs were beautifully tied to the world around them. It was completely nature-based and polytheistic, categorized into gods of space, earth, and sky, totaling 33 main deities. The absolute supreme god of this early era was Indra, invoked a massive 250 times in the Rigveda. Following closely was Agni, the god of fire, invoked 200 times. Agni acted as the crucial intermediary between humans and the gods.
But things change. Let's look at the later Vedic shift, from 1000 to 600 BC.
To really understand this shift, just look at how society fractured. Back in the early days, the Varna system was incredibly flexible. It was karma-based, meaning your actions and your profession dictated your societal status. But in the later Vedic period, this system violently locked into place. It became a rigid, birth-based caste system, firmly establishing Brahmin supremacy and the heavy oppression of the Shudras.
Tragically, that progressive societal structure we literally just celebrated earlier, it eroded sharply. Where early Vedic women held education and political rights, their status rapidly declined in this new era. In fact, some texts from this later period horrifyingly begin to describe daughters as a source of misery. It is a stark, depressing reversal of rights.
So what caused these massive societal earthquakes? Honestly, it boils down to technology and economy. Agriculture completely overtakes animal husbandry as the primary economic driver, and it's fueled by a massive technological leap, the discovery and widespread use of iron. Taxes become regularized at 1/6 of production. Simultaneously, the nature gods of the early period, Indra and Agni, lose their dominance. The supreme spiritual focus shifts entirely to the trinity of Brahma, Vishnu, and Mahesh.
Armed with these brand new iron tools and a booming agricultural setup, the notes illustrate perfectly how the civilization aggressively expanded. They pushed eastward, leaving the confines of the Punjab region and spreading all the way across to Bihar. And as the territory grew, so did the power of the rulers. The concept of the Rajan evolved into supreme kings, emperors who now claimed a divine right to rule over these massive new territories.
This entire historical journey leaves us with a fascinating and, honestly, kind of haunting mystery to ponder. If the early Aryan society so clearly championed flexibility, democratic councils, and rights for women, what exact socioeconomic pressures forced them to just abandon it all and forge the rigid, birth-based, hierarchical world of the later Vedic Age? Was it the iron, the rapid expansion, the shift to agriculture? It's a massive historical pivot that still echoes in our society today. Thanks for joining me on this explainer. Keep questioning the facts, and I'll catch you next time on Vedika Darpan.